Let me start with the truth I didn't want to say out loud. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's embarrassing how much it still hurts. Last Mother's Day, my son bought his mother-in-law a $43,000 gift. A luxury SUV, shining like it was dipped in sunlight. Big red bow, balloons, family photos, all over social media. And for me? A small box wrapped in thin paper. A simple bracelet, the kind you find by the checkout line. $10 maybe. Now listen. It wasn't the price that stung me. I'm 60 years old. I done lived through enough storms to know money don't buy meaning. But I also know love shows itself in the way people choose you. And that day, my son chose someone else. Everyone was clapping and taking pictures with her, calling her the angel of the family. They said she deserved it. And maybe she did. Lord knows I ain't the jealous type. But I stood there holding that little bracelet, trying to smile, trying to breathe through the tightness in my chest, telling myself, Lila, don't you dare let a tear fall. Not today. Not in front of them. I kept quiet. That's what I've always done. Black mothers are taught to swallow their hurt like medicine. Smile through the cracks. Clap for everyone else. Carry the world without asking who's helping you hold it. But that night, when the house got quiet, I sat on the edge of my bed and held that bracelet in my palm. And Lord, there was a heaviness in my heart I hadn't felt in years. Not because of the gift, but because I realized my own child didn't see me. Not really. Not anymore. That was the moment I knew something deep inside me needed to be told. My story, my truth, the road that shaped me, the mistakes I made, the strength I found, and the healing I'm still learning how to hold. Before I tell you how I became the woman standing here at 60, I need to take you back. Way back. To the little girl I used to be. The one nobody protected. The one who learned too early that love could hurt just as fast as it could heal. I grew up on the east side of Cleveland, in a neighborhood where the streetlights preached harder than the pastors. If you weren't home before they flickered on, trouble found you. And usually, it found me. My mama worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs. She didn't have time for softness, didn't have room for tenderness. She loved me, I know she did. But she loved me in the way a woman loves after life has beaten the sweetness out of her. Quick, sharp, practical. I remember one morning when I was 9, I woke up to the sound of her crying in the kitchen. Real soft. Real broken. I peeked around the corner, and she wiped her face so fast you'd think tears were a crime. She said, Lila, you don't cry in this world. Crying don't fix nothing. And I believed her. Lord help me. I believed her so much that I locked my feelings away like they were dangerous animals. When I was 12, the weight of the world started pressing on me. Boys saying things they shouldn't. Teachers calling me too grown. Neighbors whispering like my body was something I owed the world an explanation for. Nobody told me I was precious. Nobody told me I was allowed to be a child. So I learned to survive instead. Head high. Voice quiet. Heart armored. But here's the part that shaped me most. I carried all that pain into adulthood without ever giving it a name. And when you don't name your wounds, you pass them on. Like a story whispered from mother to daughter, generation after generation. I didn't know it then. But the way I was raised was the same way I'd raise my own son, strong but distant. Loving but silent. Present but exhausted. And years later, that silence would cost me more than I ever imagined. If I'm being honest, the first man I ever loved wasn't chosen from wisdom. He was chosen from hunger. The hunger a girl carries when she's never been held softly. His name was Marcus. Tall. Sharp smile. Voice like velvet dipped in trouble. He saw me at 19 and looked at me like I was something bright. Something worth stopping for. Nobody had ever looked at me like that. So I mistook attention for love. And charm for character. I remember our first date. Me in a thrift store dress. Him smelling like cologne he probably borrowed. We sat in his old Buick eating fries from a brown paper bag, and he told me I was special. No one had ever used that word for me. Special. I held on to it so tight, I didn't notice the other signs. The little lies. The missed calls. The late nights that didn't make sense. Back then, I didn't know a woman could lose herself slowly, not in one big heartbreak, but in tiny compromises you make just to feel loved for one more day. By 22, I was pregnant. Marcus said all the right things. We have family now. I got you. Don't worry. But words are cheap when a man hasn't grown yet. And Marcus. Lord, he was still a boy wearing a man's shoes. Our son was born on a cold February morning. And for a moment, when Marcus held that little baby, I believed we were going to make it. I believed the world was turning in our favor. But hope is tricky. It'll whisper lies just to keep you breathing. Because it didn't take long before Marcus slipped back into his shadows, gone for hours, then nights, then whole weekends. I asked him what was going on. He said, "Lila, you stressing too much." But the truth was simple. I hadn't changed, but the responsibility had. And he wasn't ready for any of it. Still, I stayed. Not because I believed him, but because I didn't believe I deserved better. Not yet. And that choice, that one choice, would shape the next 20 years of my life. In ways I never saw coming. Raising a child alone. Lord, I don't think anyone can fully understand that weight unless they've done it. Not just feeding him, not just clothing him, but protecting his heart, shaping his spirit, and doing it all while your own soul feels cracked open. After Marcus walked out, not fully, not all at once, but just enough to leave the spaces where love should have been, I became everything for our son. Mother, father, teacher, friend. The only person who could hold the world upright for him. There were nights I sat on the floor of our tiny apartment, his little crib beside me, listening to his even breathing, and I wondered if I'd done enough. If I'd been enough. I had bills stacked to the ceiling, bosses who didn't care, and neighbors who whispered more than they spoke. And still, I smiled in the morning, made breakfast, walked him to school, held him when he scraped his knee, kissed him goodnight, prayed for him like my own heart was breaking in the process. I remember one afternoon and he asked me, "Mama, why don't we have a big house like other kids?" And I smiled so big, tried to make my voice warm and safe, and said, "Sweetheart, we have everything we need. Love, laughter, and each other. That's a house too." But inside I was screaming, not just for him but for myself. For the little girl who never had enough. For the woman who gave everything and sometimes got nothing in return. Still, I never let him see that part of me. Not then. Not ever. Because a mother's pain is a private storm, and you shelter your child from it even when it threatens to drown you. Those years shaped me in ways I couldn't even name. They made me sharp, tender in secret, a survivor in the daylight, a dreamer in the dark. And every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every hidden tear, they built the woman I am today. By the time I hit my 30s, I knew two things for certain. First, I would never let anyone else define my worth. Second, I would raise my son to believe in himself no matter what. But life doesn't wait for certainty. It comes at you sideways, with heartbreak disguised as comfort, and lessons wrapped in pain you didn't ask for. I stayed with Marcus longer than I should have. Longer than my friends thought reasonable. Longer than my mother ever expected. I stayed because leaving felt like admitting I had failed. And I was scared. Scared that my son would grow up thinking love doesn't last, that women get discarded, that hearts can't heal. There were years of silence in our home. Empty dinners. Unspoken resentments. Moments when I sat on the couch with my head in my hands, wondering if I was raising a child in a cage of my own making. Yet in the middle of all that quiet despair, I found my own strength. I learned to forgive. Not him, not fully at least, but myself, for believing in love so completely, for hoping when hope seemed impossible. I also learned that love doesn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it's steady, quiet. The kind that teaches you to wake up every day and keep going. Even when the world is trying to convince you that you're too small, too weak, too tired. I began volunteering at the community center, teaching young girls to read, to write, to dream. Each time I saw the light spark in their eyes, I remembered the little girl I used to be, the one who needed someone to believe in her. And slowly I realized, maybe staying wasn't just about Marcus. Maybe it was about showing my son and myself what courage and persistence look like. Even in a home filled with shadows, even when your heart is bruised, even when you think no one notices. That choice to stay, to endure, to rise above, it wasn't easy. But it laid the foundation for everything that would come after. Life has a way of circling back. Just when you think you've buried the past, it comes knocking at your door. And sometimes you don't have the choice to ignore it. It happened one rainy afternoon. I was at the grocery store, bag in hand, when I saw him. Marcus, older, tired, not the boy I fell for, but the man I once trusted with my heart. For a moment I froze. Memories flashed: first date fries, sleepless nights, whispered promises. Every tear I cried, every hope I held, every mistake I made, all of it was in that single glance. He walked up to me, eyes cautious, voice low. "Lila, can we talk?" And I knew. Not about forgiveness yet. Not about love, but about understanding. I had to hear him, to see why the story we wrote together had turned into a shadow over my life. We sat on a bench outside, rain dripping on our coats, and he told me things I didn't expect. Not excuses, not apologies fully formed, but truth. Pain he carried, choices he made, regrets he buried deep. I listened, because I realized something powerful. I didn't need him to be perfect anymore. I didn't need him to love me the way I once craved. I only needed to witness the man he had become. And in some strange way, allow it to heal a piece of me. By the time the rain stopped, I had forgiven him. Not for him. Not for what we lost. But for me. For the little girl who once believed in fairy tale love. For the woman who needed to rise from the ashes without bitterness. And as I walked home that evening, I felt a weight lift from my chest. A quiet, steady relief. Because the past had finally stopped haunting me. And I realized, sometimes closure doesn't come from endings. It comes from understanding, and from letting go. After years of carrying everyone else's expectations, I realized I had forgotten the sound of my own voice. The voice that could speak without fear, that could laugh without apology, that could demand respect without guilt. It started small. A poetry class at the community center. A workshop for women who had stories buried under work, children, and survival. I signed up one rainy morning, thinking, maybe I'll just listen. Maybe I'll just nod politely and go home. But something inside me stirred. Something that had been quiet for decades. I raised my hand to read a poem I had scribbled in the margins of an old notebook. And when I spoke, the room went silent. Not out of judgment, but because someone, maybe even me, had finally dared to speak. The words felt like air after years underwater. My past, my pain, my triumphs, all of it poured out in rhythm and rhyme. And when I finished, I looked up at the women around me. They nodded, smiled, understood. I didn't just find my voice. I found my people. The women who reminded me that strength isn't loud. It isn't flashy. It's steady, consistent, persistent. It's knowing who you are and standing in that truth, even when the world forgets to notice. From that day on, I started speaking more. At events, at schools, on community panels. I shared my story, not just the heartbreaks, but the lessons. Not just the sacrifices, but the triumphs. And every time I spoke, I felt a little lighter. A little stronger. a little more free. By 60, I had discovered something beautiful. Life isn't just about surviving the storms. It's about learning to dance in the rain. And sometimes, it starts with just one voice daring to rise. By the time I was in my 50s, I realized something profound. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. I had carried it for decades. For Marcus. For the people who never showed up. For my own mistakes. Every grudge, every hurt, every word left unsaid, it had weighed me down like chains I didn't even know I was wearing. One evening, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the sun dip behind the rooftops, and I decided, enough. Not for them, not to erase what happened. But for me, I started writing letters. Not to send, not even to show anyone. Just to release the anger, the disappointment, the regrets. I wrote to Marcus. I wrote to my mother. I wrote to myself as the little girl I once was. And as I wrote, I felt a shift. The tightness in my chest loosened. The heaviness in my heart lifted. I forgave them. Not because they deserved it. Not because it made things right. But because I deserved peace. Soon after, life gave me a gift. A friend. Someone who saw me, really saw me, and never tried to fix me or change me. We talked, we laughed, we held each other's silence as tenderly as our joys. It wasn't romantic fireworks, but a steady warmth that reminded me love could feel safe. I learned that forgiveness is not forgetting. It's not excusing. It's choosing to release the chains and move forward. And when you do that, you open a door for love, for happiness, for hope. At 58, I finally understood that life is less about what others give you, and more about how you choose to stand in the light, even after all the darkness. By the time I turned 60, I realized life doesn't wait for perfect timing. It doesn't send invitations with instructions. You have to take the wheel yourself. After decades of giving, sacrificing, surviving, I finally understood what it meant to truly live. Not just exist, not just endure. Live. I started traveling, small trips at first. A weekend in New Orleans, a week in Charleston, listening to jazz in dark little bars, talking to strangers whose stories reminded me that every person carries battles and beauty. I took cooking classes, learned to paint, even tried my hand at storytelling on stage. Every time I did something new, I felt a piece of my younger self cheering from somewhere deep inside me. My son had grown into a man, strong, compassionate, and kind, a reflection of every lesson, every hardship, every tear I had poured into raising him. And watching him flourish was the most profound validation I could ever receive. But the biggest change was in me. I no longer measured my worth by what others gave me, or by the mistakes I had made. I measured it by the courage I carried, the love I shared, and the peace I had cultivated in my own heart. I found joy in quiet mornings with coffee and jazz, in long walks where the wind whispered truths I had forgotten, in laughter shared with friends who had become chosen family. Life, I realized, was always offering me gifts. I just needed to reach out and take them. And as I look back, I see a life that was not easy, not perfect, but completely beautifully mine. And finally, I can say with a heart wide open, I am proud of her, the woman I've become. Here I am, 60 years old. And I finally understand the truth I have been chasing my whole life. Life isn't about how much you give or how much you endure. It's about how fully you let yourself feel and how bravely you choose to stand in the light afterwards. I remember that Mother's Day, so many years ago. The gifts, the choices, the quiet ache in my chest. I could have let that define me forever. But I didn't. I chose to rise, to speak, to forgive, to love myself, my son, my friends, even those who once hurt me. Because I realized the most radical act in this world is allowing yourself to live with an open heart. I've made mistakes. Plenty of them. I've loved imperfectly, failed spectacularly, and sometimes hidden my tears behind smiles. But every scar, every heartbreak, Every triumph has led me here. To a place where I can stand tall and say, I survived. I endured. I became. And now when I look around, I see life in its purest form. Not in material things, not in accolades, but in quiet mornings, laughter shared with loved ones, in stories passed down, in the courage to face another day with grace. If I could speak to that little girl I once was, I would hold her close and whisper, "You are enough. You are strong. You are loved. And one day you will stand in the light, and it will feel like home." So, here I am, standing in the light. Not because the world made it easy, but because I chose to keep walking, keep loving, keep believing. And that, my friends, is the most beautiful gift of all.